Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healing Art After Hours. I'm Shauna Robeson with Creating Space Coastal, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about how to master your mind through art. And part of that's going to be an introduction to Neurographica, and I will be demonstrating how to make this number. So please join me and like, subscribe, and share if you find this content helpful. Enjoy, let's get started. So master your mind through art. And that's the topic. Like I said, this month is we're going to be introducing Neurographica art, but I thought I wanted to open it up a little further and just talk about the general way that art does help us master our mind. And what I mean by master our mind is that, our mind is, I think of it like a radio receiver where we're constantly getting radio stations. And it's our job to decide what we do with those thoughts and the feelings that we have. So being able to be aware, first of all, and then be able to maybe redirect or transform some of our thinking is what I mean by mastering your mind. So it starts with awareness, like I said, and mindfulness, which is a quality or state of being conscious or aware of something, or also the mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations. And I like to highlight that while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings and thoughts and bodily sensations, because part of being mindful is being aware of what's going on, but also looking at it from an awareness and observation mind rather than a judgmental mind, letting go of the judgment around what we are observing and just observe. And so one of the things that can help us with that aspect is the meditation process. And one definition is think deeply or focus one's mind. And a lot of times when people hear meditation, they think that the goal is to clear our minds of any thought. And that's just not reality. And that isn't the goal. The goal is to focus our mind on something and be aware of how our mind wanders. So on one of the most common mindful meditations is observing one's breath. It's that because we can do that anywhere. We always have our breath, no matter where we are, hopefully, unless you're underwater, or unless you're scuba. I mean, I could be a scuba underwater, but if you're, typically you're breathing and you can observe that, and you observe that with your five senses. So you can observe the feeling, of your chest rising and falling with your breath, the sensation of the air passing through your nose, your nostrils, tickling your hairs, or across your tongue if you're breathing through your mouth. Maybe you have some taste sensations, some residual lunge, or something as you breathe that you notice, or maybe there's a scent in the air. What does it feel like? What are the sensations that are being stimulated by that experience? So when we focus and direct our mind, when we tune into the station of our present moment, and in this case, we're doing a deeper focus on our breathing, the idea is that it takes a little break from the other thoughts because we're keeping our mind busy on something. But what we'll find if we're doing that, you'll start to notice your mind wandering, that monkey mind that wants to swing from branch to branch and go from thought to thought. And it might be, when you start this meditation, what I've found is I'll be doing it and then suddenly I'll realize I've gone on this thought train and I'm all the way in Detroit or wherever, I've hopped on the train of thought. And what we want to do is we don't want to hop on the train, but if we realize that we are on the train, we want to gently redirect our mind back to what our focus is going to be. And be aware that we are, we left the station, but we don't want to beat ourselves up about doing it. We don't want to add that judgment to the thought at all, or the fact that we had the thought. We just want to redirect ourselves back to what's at hand. So that's just a little intro to meditation. And you can do it with lots of different things, not just the breath. There's guided meditation where someone walks you through a visualization practice, and whatnot. So there are many ways to do meditation, and it really does help us to retrain our mind to come back to think. And you'll find that once you practice this, you're able to return more easily, or maybe you don't stay on the train quite as long, or maybe you don't get on the train as frequently. You just start to realize that you're able to redirect your mind a little bit easier with time and practice. So art meditation, if you think about trying to focus on something, art is a great way to meditate. Whatever you're doing, it really takes a lot of mental energy and focus to get into that creative process. And that takes us out of those other thoughts. And I think it's, for me, because I have ADHD and I'm a very busy person, it helps me to be doing something rather than just trying to think. I find it a lot more difficult to stay in a meditative state when I'm just focusing on my breathing and really thinking about my mind. But when I'm in my art flow, man, I don't even hear my boyfriend talking to me, or, I don't hear anything. I just get into the flow. So I do notice that for me, it's easier if I'm doing something physically that helps me to get deeper into that focus. So art is not only a way that we can connect with ourselves, because our arm, our writing, our instrument that we use, whether it's a brush or pencil, is just an extension, right, of our arm, and our arm's an extension of our mind, right? So it's a way to connect within ourselves and to foster acceptance. We talked about how important that is to not have the judgment. And we always talk about that here, as I try to say, use your mentor voice when you're talking to yourself. So fostering acceptance of self and of your process. And then it creates a space between negative thoughts. I'll talk a little bit about how often we have negative thoughts that come, that we, are receiving in our minds. So it again, just takes us out of the world, whatever's happening, and focus on this, and just a little vacation from those thoughts. It allows us to have a sense of flow and freedom when we're in that zone. I mean, we just, I don't know, creative flow just is, it's just a different experience than other types of activities that I've found. So I'm hoping you've experienced these as well. Deeper self-expression, because some people can't articulate themselves verbally, and this is a nonverbal way of expressing ourselves. Sometimes we don't even know what we're feeling, because we maybe don't have that awareness, but we can still express it through art, even if we can't write the words or articulate it in voice. And then it also is a calming and centering experience, because it does, relaxes, it calms our heart rate, it calms our blood pressure. It just, takes us into a more calm experience. So art is a great way to meditate, especially if you tend to be a very active person. The other thing I want to talk about is, if you want to use your words, if you are a journaler, to think about doing a mindful journaling. And, our mind has these different sides. When we experience an event, we have our emotional mind that says a story. So I'll use the example that I've used in the past of being on the road and someone cuts you off. You immediately start creating a story about that person. They're a villain, they're not considerate, they're blah, 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 bleep, 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 bleep. And so we create this story about this person. But if we let our logical mind come into play, then we can think, what is just the facts that we know? That's the facts, just the facts, ma'am. Nothing, no story attached, no meaning attached, no intention behind what someone else did, because we don't know their intention. You might have just been on their blind side. So our logical mind is just listing the facts of what happened. So in this case, it would be the car veered on into my lane. That's the only fact. We don't really know any other facts about it than that. And then the wise mind is what we want to incorporate once we've looked at both the emotional mind and the logical mind. Then we come together and we can think more wisely and say, okay, what's best for the situation now? What is in my best interest to do and how to respond to the situation? If we react with our emotional mind, we probably will escalate the situation and could escalate to something that's not safe for anybody. But if we let ourselves process the experience and get to our more higher wisdom, then we can say, you know what, the best thing for me to do is just to stay safe on this road and let that go, because I don't know the situation and it doesn't really hurt them for me to be angry. I heard today on something, a quote, it said, hate is like, what is it? It was a great quote, and I think I wrote it down somewhere. Hate is like swallowing poison and then expecting the other person to die. So I think, when we get angry and we're angry at someone else, it harms us more than it harms them, unless we do something that escalates, which can harm everybody. So anyway, that's just a way you can process in your journal, or through art, or both, an experience that you're having that you need to work through. All right, let's get to Neurographica. Now, I would like to first start by saying that I am not a certified instructor. So I'm only giving you a very tip of the iceberg to introduce the topic, and I'm going to give you some resources so you can take a deeper dive. But I don't profess to know all the ins and outs of it. It's a 9-month program and hundreds of hours of work to do. So it's a very easy technique, but it's a very complex science behind it, and algorithm and process that's done beyond just the physical technique. So I just want to put that out there. I am not a certified trainer of this. I'm just going to give you what I was able to glean from my research. So what is neurographic art? Well, neuro is relating to nerves. Neurons are the cells in our brain that connect with the rest of our body and help us function. Graphic, of course, is relating to visual art. So putting these together, it's an art that's connecting our mental processes to the art process. It was developed in 2014, so it's a fairly young science, and by psychologist Pavel Piskarev. I hope that I said that correctly, PhD. And I do have a link there, www.neurographica.us. You could go learn a lot more. And there are classes you can take. You can take classes just to learn it as an artist, or you could take or as for yourself, for your own therapy, but there's also classes you can take to be an instructor. And this is an example. The art below here is an example of some neurographic art. So that's what it looks like. And then you'll notice that the look of the art itself does resemble the neurons in the mind. So the neural network. So that's part of it. It looks like it, but it's also helping us connect with it. So there is a lot of symbolism within this. So one of the purposes of neurographic art is, several of the purposes are to reprogram those self-limiting thought patterns. So we have an average of 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts per day. Take that in. That's a lot. 80% of those are negative. 95% are repetitive. And 85% of what we worry about never happens. So imagine all this RAM, random access memory that we're using, all this power that we're using in our minds. I mean, yes, actually our brain does burn calories, but I think that it might be better to try to not use so much brain power to have repetitive thoughts and have negative thoughts. So if there is a way to reprogram our thinking, I think that's a very powerful tool in mastering our mind. It helps us relieve stress. It's a meditative process. And also, like I said, worry is a major source of stress, tension, and mental exhaustion. So if we can reduce some of that worry, that would benefit us in many ways, health-wise. And then to help solve problems, it's a way of accessing more of your mental power, more neurons, thinking outside of the box in a creative way to solve problems. And finally, to develop aesthetic intelligence, which is basically an artistic eye. So being able to discern between what looks good, appealing artistically, and what doesn't. So, and any art practice that you do is going to help you with that. Now, I talked about that there's a lot of symbolism within this process. The pen is an extension of your mind, and I talked about that, like a brush or whatever it is, that's an extension of our mind. The paper is seen as a mental landscape, with the edges of the paper being the connections to the outer universe. So you have your inner mental universe and then the outer universe. The line intersections, and you'll notice back, if we look back at these pictures, there's a lot of lines that intersect. Okay, and when we first do this intersections, there's going to be these sharp intersections, sharp corners, and that symbolizes blocked energy and conflict. Whereas when we smooth them out, because part of the process is to smooth those out, that increases the flow of energy and it symbolizes the resolution of conflict. And then also there's some symbolism with the number of connections. So the number of lines that we have are maybe represent the neuronal connections of our mind that we're using to process for whatever we're working on. The supplies that you need for this are really simple. It can be just about anything, as long as you have something to draw on, something to draw with, and if you want to add any color or pigmentation, something to color with. And just choose the substrate or the paper based on what you want to do. So if you want to do watercolor, just use watercolor paper and just use a marker that's permanent, so that you make sure that when you add the water, it's not going to run. So you can choose your own adventure here, anything to draw on, anything to draw with, and anything to color with. Now I'm going to be using this mixed media by Canson and a extra fine Sharpie and some watercolor pencils for mine. So let's just go over the basic algorithm. I'm going to go over this fairly quickly, but then I'm going to be demonstrating the process step by step afterwards. So don't worry if it feels like I'm moving too quickly. I want this in the notes because if you guys purchase the notes, then you can look through and see, the step by step. But I don't have to spend a lot of time on them. So the first step is to set your intention. So think about what is keeping you up at night. It could be maybe pain that you're suffering, or it could be a problem that's coming up, or something that you're a question that you have. So whatever that is, write it down. It doesn't have to be on the page that you're going to be doing your art on. It could be on a separate page. It's just to set an intention of what you want to process when you're doing it. Step 2 are the neurolines. And those are, with the intention in mind, you're going to use your non-dominant hand to create lines, wiggles, just freestyle across the page in any kind of pattern. You can swirl around, you can wiggle it as you go. There's no rhyme or reason. You just want to go from one end and end up at the other end. You just don't want any of your lines to end in the middle of the page. They always have to connect to the edge. But you can swirl around inside. It can be really anything. And using your non-dominant hand will fire the neurons on the right side of your mind. So if you're or the other side of your mind, I should say. On me, I'm right-handed. So, the right hand is connected to the left side of the brain and vice versa. So it'll help open up and fire more neurons on the other side of your brain that you don't typically use. And I think that's the point of having that non-dominant hand for this step. Now, for the rest of it, you don't have to continue using your non-dominant hand. You can use your dominant hand. And, if you're just doing it for an art project, you can use your dominant hand for everything. So you get artistic license with everything that I say. So The next step is to add geometrical shapes and or field lines as desired. And there's a lot of symbolism with the shapes that you add. And again, I don't have all the training, so I'm not going to try to teach you that. But I did find this meaning of shapes link. It's a psychological meaning of shapes by Shutterstock. So I thought that was fascinating. But you're not going to be, trying to figure out what you're trying to do. You're just going to pick what's intuitive to you. And then if you were trained, you probably could analyze it based on the shapes you chose. You can analyze maybe what's going on. That's the part I can't really tell you more about. But observe any thoughts or emotions that come up while you're in this process. Now, the field lines are if you wanted to add these deeper, thicker veins through your project, those are field lines. And again, this is all based on what feels right to you intuitively and that aesthetic appeal too. It could be that it aesthetically looks good, or you just feel like you want some bold lines, or you want squares or circles. I find myself wanting to do circles all the time. That seems to be my thing. So I just tend to be, on the curvy side. It works with me. But just maybe one day it'll be one thing and another day it'll be something else, depending on what you're processing. The step 4 is to round the connections. So you're going to take all the V's that are created by these intersections and see how those are sharp connections. As they cross each other, they create these V's. All you're going to do is soften those V's to a U. Just everywhere that there's a crossover, there's going to be a V shape, and you just create a U. And then you want to smooth out the line as you go, taper it out. You don't want to have it be a blunt edge. You don't want this to come out and then it to be like blocked there. You want it to look like it's blending into that line, the thread that's going to it. So this symbolizes releasing that conflict, that stuck energy. And this is a very meditative part of this. This can take hours, actually, depending on how many lines you have. So be aware of how many lines you're creating, because just know if you're gonna be doing the smoothing out part, you might be there a while if you put a lot of lines. So. And then this is an example of looking at what does it look like before I've done all of this smoothing. You can see how this doesn't feel complete at all. I have little like tails coming off. There's, sharp connections. It just doesn't look relaxed to me. It looks unfinished. But once I just filled in those curves, look at what a difference it makes from just filling in those going from the V's to the U's. It has a completely different feel, and it's starting to look like art now. Then the next step is to embellish. So here's where you can really take up the artistic side of it, and you can go anywhere you want. You can add lots of color, you can add more lines and swirls and patterns. Anything goes. Is you just embellish it intuitively with what makes sense to you. And then the final step is to analyze, appreciate, and enjoy. And of course, if you were fully trained, you would have the knowledge to be able to do more of an analysis. But you can just look at it and say, what are the emotions or feelings or thoughts that are coming up as I look at this? Think about the thoughts and feelings that came up while you were working on it. Did you find any solutions to the problem? And maybe come back to it later. It might you might not, it might not come to you right away, but maybe like within that day, maybe it'll pop in your mind. So you've just maybe opened up some things in it, and your mind's still kind of processing it. So just see what you discover at the end. And then option 2 is to forget all the algorithm, forget all the psychology and science and all of that jazz, and just use it as a doodle pattern, because it's beautiful and fun. And this is an example of a Zentangle, which is next month's topic, that I use that pattern. And it's a great pattern to add to anything, any project. Now, I just wanted to show you a few samples. This is the basic bare bones, no embellishments whatsoever, maybe a few little squiggly lines that I added, but just nothing, nothing fancy. And then here I added a little more color with some colored pencils, maybe some little bubbles. So you can just play it up as much or as little as you want. Here, this was actually the very first one I ever did. And I did this with a silver Sharpie on just a black piece of drawing paper. And then I used some gel pens to do some embellishments in there. So you can go in every single direction. Here, I was able to embellish it with a little critter and some Copic markers. So it started off, it was going to be like more of a tree, and then it turned into a little dragon's lair or egg, egg tree. I don't know. So the thing is that you can use it however makes sense for you. I have a few links to YouTube's, and when I post it on YouTube, I'll put those links in the notes, so you can check out some of those other resources, some other teaching videos around neurographic art. I don't know for sure if those people are certified trainers or not. I assume that if they've been able to publish their videos, they are. I use inspired by Neurographica specifically because I don't want to step on any toes, any trademark toes. But so if you want these notes, you can go to my website, Creating Space Coastal, and they're available there. So this is an example of, I just wanted to show the simple, the neuro lines, and then I added the shapes, and then I started adding those curves, and you could just see this transformation. I mean, if you looked at the first one, you'd be like, what is this? But you can see this transformation as it goes along, and I love that. I love when it starts to, to look like something intentional. So it's a great process. It's so easy. So I'm gonna do a couple demonstrations just on this kind of scratch paper, and then I'll do a piece in my journal. Okay. And I want to show you with just basic, I had a pencil here. Okay, here we go. I want to show you basic and then kind of go up with more advanced, just so you can see how simple it can be. So with a pencil, I'm taking my non-dominant hand. So the first step, actually, the first step is to set your intention. So let's say I want to think about strategies to improve my workshops. Okay. Now, obviously, I can't really meditate while I'm with you guys, but I would write my intentions somewhere, not usually on my art. Then the next step is to, with my non-dominant hand, which for me is my left hand, I'm going to start at the end, and then I'm going to just let the pencil or whatever it is move around the page. Now, and then eventually I'm going to go to the other, oops, let me get to I want you to see the end of the page. So I'm going to pretend like these are the borders of my page, because I'm going to be doing several of these. So I just want you to see. So let's say that's my page. Okay. And then I'm just going to start at another end and go around, and I can start and end anywhere. And I can do that as many times as I want. Sometimes people have said, if you do a little brainstorm first, so let's say I did a brainstorm of words and I came up with 10 words, I could do 10 lines. But I'll tell you what, that's going to be a lot of crossovers if you do it that way. So you could do whatever makes sense to you. I could stop at 2 lines. This is a pretty simple one, so I think I'll stop there, because I don't want to make this a big project. So now the next step is to put in, if I want, any geometric patterns or shapes that I want. So I'm just going to try to think outside my normal. See, I even do kind of circle-y patterns within my things. So I think I'm going to try to do something different. I'm going to just do some triangles. Now you could use a stencil if you want, but I would encourage you to do freehand, because I think it just all looks more organic that way. And I like to do things in 3s for my aesthetics. So I'm just going to do 3 triangles, different sizes. Okay. And then if I wanted to add any of those field lines, which are the thicker lines, It could be that I do a separate line, or I could thicken a line that's already there. So I'm just gonna maybe do a little combination of both. So I'm using a pencil, so it's a little bit trickier, but you could use like a thicker marker, for example. I'm just putting more pressure. And so I'm following the line a little bit and then I'm veering off, just to have some variation in the thickness of the lines. And then I'm going, the next step, step 4, is going to be to round the connections. So I'm just going to go around and find, and this is kind of a Where's Waldo type thing. Sometimes it takes a while to find all the connections, but I'm going to have to look for those sharp. Every crossover is going to have those V's. And all I'm going to do is basically draw a little kind of a U and then fill it in. Let me bring this down. Show some detail. I'm just gonna. Now, one of the challenges that you could find if you're using like a Sharpie, for example, let's say you're using very porous paper and it bleeds a lot. So then it's harder to get some of those details. So you could use a smaller marker, or, you know, that might make it a little bit easier than using the fatter marker. So that's one way, or just be okay with it bleeding a little bit. Now you'll notice this part has a little bit of a tail that sticks up. It's not really blended into this thread. So all I'm going to do is just blend it in. Just try to taper it down until it's part of, it looks like it's cohesive with that thread. And there we go. And then I'm just gonna, and this is the part that takes time. It's very meditative, relaxing. Okay, so that's an example of doing it with the pencil. And then, of course, once I filled all of those in, I could start, the next step would be to go ahead and embellish if I wanted to add lines. So I'm going to skip all of the fill-ins just because we would be here all day for me to do that. And since I'm doing just little samplets, I'm going to just skip that part for now. But then at this point, I would say, okay, what things could I add to kind of, you know, to make it interesting? Maybe I want to make a little spiral over here. Maybe I want to add little thready lines in between, or little wiggles. So you can start embellishing in any way that you want. You could get out your Zentangle patterns if you want and create some interesting, because it does kind of look like a string for a Zentangle. Sometimes I just like to add multiple lines. So that's just where you, let's see, maybe there's a lot open here, so I want something there. So it's really just a matter of what makes sense to you at the time. That's where you just take your intuition and let it run wild. It's fun stuff. So see, I'm just using not even a sharpened pencil. I'm just using a dull pencil. And I can still create some really fun art with that. And I could even just do shading if I wanted. Instead of coloring, I could just practice some shading techniques. Just adding some contrast. So I could sit here and do this all day and forget you guys were there. That's how in the flow this process can be. Okay, so let me show you another way. Let's say you try to do your neural lines and you're finding it hard to be random. Maybe you find yourself trying to create a pattern and you're really not supposed to create any kind of pattern. You're supposed to let it go. So if you're trying to be more random and you're finding it hard, one technique is to take a coin or something round. I'm going to use a different type of pen now. It's a little ballpoint pen. And what you can do is starting at the end, this is the edge of my paper. You could start at the edge and then you push the coin and wherever it goes is where you go. And it's gonna maybe turn or you don't know where it's gonna go. And then you'll end up with a string and then you just start somewhere else. Oh, I'm using my right hand. Let me use my left hand. Use my non-dominant hand. And let it lead me. Kind of think of it as the universe deciding. In this case, it's a dime. My friend believes her son sends dimes from heaven. So anytime I find a dime, I think it's from Peter. So this is a Peter's dime. It's usually when I need a little bit of a boost or reminder. I'm not trying to steer this thing. I'm just trying to keep pushing it and it occasionally moves on its own. So you can get some interesting, and the character of this line is very different than the character of this line, but I like it. It's almost like a map. Kind of looks like a road map. Now I want something over here aesthetically. So I'm going to put my coin on this side of the page just because there's a lot of blank page over there. Okay. So that's one way you could do the neural lines if you're struggling with making them feel more random, or I don't know.
Donna, do you have to start from the edge of the page, or can you like block off an area with washi tape and then do it from the edge of the washi tape in?
Well, you can do it however you want because that's creative license, but to do it in the algorithm, I mean, obviously, if you're going to be if you're doing painting off because you're painting and you want to have a border, then that just counts. The tape would be the end of the page. So just count that as the border, because that's symbolizing the world. But I understand it, because if you're doing a watercolor, you're going to tape it down. So if you want to do a washi tape border because you want to have a clean border around it, that's fine. Just then go all the way to the washi tape. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
I guess the page is supposed to be the world. You said that's why you start from the very end.
Well, the part on the page is your mental landscape, and then out here this is the connection to the universe. But the edge can be whatever you want. So if I want a border around my piece, I might put the tape there, and I count the edges where the tape is. You know, the tape's going to be here. So it's just a symbol of that. And so you can decide where the edge of your page is. It's just that within the landscape of the piece, you don't want something to stop right here. You don't want it dangling in the middle. You want it to connect to the edge of the art. But it's okay to put a border if you want.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. And then let's do it with some we're going to do some big, these are the big markets. And I'm just going to again make border of my page. Now, sometimes I might go from one end and kind of wiggle it around and go to the end, or sometimes I might swirl around a lot. It just really depends. And that's where you learn about what you're processing through, your patterns. Maybe if you're really, just unhappy about something, maybe you would have more jagged, maybe it would look more angry. You might get a more angry pattern because you're processing something and you're letting that out. So it's going to vary based on what you're processing and how your brain works and what you feel like doing. Just do it whatever you're inspired to do. All right. And then I'm going to add, actually, I'm going to keep using this one. I wanted to show you guys a fun. Now, when I start to add lines to it, I like when I have corners. I don't know why I opened that one. When I have corners, I like to connect them to the edge. I like I don't like my corners to be dangling, if you will. So I don't know why that is, but I tend to like to run those off to the edge for some reason. Maybe that says something about my psychology. So my OCD. I don't know for sure, but okay. So then I would start doing the rounding. And again, this paper is not it's not real, it's a little bit more porous, so it has a lot of bleeding. Do make sure you have something underneath if you're using more like the Sharpies or the alcohol markers. Okay, and then I'm not going to do the whole thing because I want to do a project, but I'm gonna do a project in my journal. But I just wanted to show you samples of 3 different types of writing utensils so you get an idea. You can do kind of a shadow. You do a darker color, you can create these 3-dimensional looks. So it looks like there's this is creating a shadow, so it's more 3-dimensional. So that's a fun way you can embellish too. Yeah, I'm going to play around with this one when I do a bigger, maybe I'll do that in my journal because that's fun. Okay, I think I'm gonna stop with my scratch paper and actually just a little tip. These are actually These are funeral place settings from my ex's grandparents, and but they make great, you have a lot of leftover if you have a family member, and it's a way to, keep them in your memory and also use the placemats for something. So little tip if you have a family funeral.
Shauna, would you ever use a brush pen after you did the initial drawing, the initial lines, like to add more symbols?
Tomorrow.
I use the brush. Oh, you mean to fill in the brush pens? Sure. That would be a great idea. If you're good at brush pens. You're not talking about the water brush pens. You're talking about the actual like brush tipped pens, right?
Yeah, that you could do calligraphy with or something.
Yeah,
So
those are great. Those
Okay.
would be great to fill in as long as you're good at it. I haven't mastered brush tip pens personally, but if you have decent control over those would be great because you could create some really nice thick and thin lines. So I would absolutely recommend giving that a go. Okay, so I'm going to do a project. I'm going to do with my Bic markets, and I know it's going to bleed, so I'm going to put some paper, or I think it's going to bleed. This is the Canon. I'm going to be using this. I'm going to try to use this for most of my projects this year because I want to do this as a journal. And it's a mixed media paper, 98 pound by Canson. So I'm going to try it out and see how it works. It's going to work better for some things than others, but it's mixed media, so it's supposed to work for a lot of different things. So it may be a little too porous for the markets, but I want to give it a try. But I am going to definitely put a page below just because if it does bleed through, I don't want to damage the page behind it. So, all right. So I'm using my lighter color to do my lines in. And I'm gonna, now, if you're forgetting the algorithm, you can use whatever hand. You don't have to think of all those things. So if you're just doing it for art, keep that in mind. But I like doing it with the left hand. All right. I only did 3 lines, but it's still there's still a lot going on. All right, now I'm going to add my shapes. I think I'm going to do triangles again. And then I like to bring the tails to the end. Okay, and then I'm going to, if I wanted to add any other lines, but it's got a lot of lines going on. There's this spot over here, but I don't feel like I have to fill everything. So I'm going to let that be that. And then I'm going to start filling in my use. How are we doing on time? We have about 15 minutes. So I'm going to just play with this for the next 15 minutes. And you guys can work on yours. I think there's a lot of potential, in moving in different directions with this. There's so many different ways to use this. Just the basic design technique. Even if you put all of the psychology and the science behind it aside, there's so much artistic potential with playing with these. With this, well, I keep saying Sharpie, but it's a Bic market. It bleeds, so I just find myself dabbing in there because the longer you hold it down, the more ink it's going to release. So go lightly if you're using a Bic market or any alcohol based marker like Sharpies. Same thing. See, like that one, I kind of made a little too fat, so I'm just gonna taper it down. It's okay. I can fill it in as much as I want. Just adds character. And this helps with dexterity, drawing dexterity. So it's a great exercise to, like I said, a gateway to drawing, to art, to linear art. It helps with artistic eye, with developing that hand-eye coordination, muscle memory. So that's why I thought it was a good starter project for. Let's see how much it's bleeding. Oh yeah, it's for sure bleeding. I hope that what I have in there is thick enough. And this is fun with gel pens. I mean, really anything. You could make everything different colors if you want. The one thing I find that's tricky though, when I've done the multicolors, is which color to use to fill in these intersections, because one is one color and what's crossing over it is a different color. And I find it a conundrum. It's like, okay, which, I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but it's like I have two colors coming into an intersection. Which color do I use to connect those two? Maybe you can find a color that that goes with both of them. Like if it's red and blue, you could do purple for the connector. I don't know. Let's see, I wanted to do a little bit of coloring with my watercolor pencils, but maybe I'll coloring for another day, since this one has a lot of color. I really want to do the shading with this one. So I think I'm going to do that. Yeah, I'm enjoying that. Cool. And just when I think I'm done, I find more of these.
Shauna, if your triangle has like a tip right at the end of it, would you make that kind of into a U shape?
Oh, you mean inside the triangle?
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, I do. It's really what speaks to you, but I tend to like to round it all. I don't know that that's as much as a rule because it's not like a line, like if it's not a, I don't know, like I said, the rule around that for Neurographica, but for me, I do tend to smooth those out. Um, but I think it's really that's where your aesthetic, because when you start playing at the end, you may add a bunch of lines that are crossing and you don't do all this, you don't add these because you just want those lines open. So that's going to be more the aesthetic part. Like this part, you're smoothing out the conflicts. So I think it's really up to you. Well, I thought I added some shapes, but I don't think I did add any shapes. I think I like it the way it is though. See, I even have kind of round stuff there. So goes with my personality. Every time I think, okay, I'm done, and then I find another one. All right, I might just move on with my other step anyway, because I want to show you guys. I'm using just a darker color along the same family, and I'm going to think about where I want like the light source to be so I can have my shadows follow. So I think I'm going to say the light source is this way. So I'm going to just basically bring in this darker color along some of these shapes to make it look like they're raised. Just on the side where, because if the sun's coming this way, this is blocking the sun right there. So it's creating a little bit of a shadow. And I could do it on the opposite side over here if I want. Let's see how that works. And it just gives kind of a three-dimensional effect. And I can make it wider, and it just makes it look like it's taller element. The bigger the shadow, oh yeah, that's fun. I'm liking that. I hadn't done that before, but I'd seen people do that. And I think I really like it. Yeah, look at how three-dimensional that looks just by adding that second layer. That's fun. Fun, fun, fun. All right, it's 8:30 now. So I'm going to peel myself away from this because I'm having a lot of fun and I don't want to stop. It's a good problem to have, but I also want to respect you guys. Okay, so I'm just going to show you that's that angle, but it's also something different this way. And then it's something entirely different this way. And depending on how you look at it, it's going to look different. So hello, just a final note. This is after I finished doing some working with it after class. And I just wanted to add a little tip to how I got this effect. So I was using the Bic Markets, which is an alcohol-based marker. And this was I used the lighter color was Desert Rose, and the darker color was Plum-tastic Purple. And then in order to get this little bleeding effect, I just used an alcohol-based clear blender, and it's hard to get that to focus in. But this is just it's called Fluently, and I got it at Daiso, which is kind of like a dollar store. It was a very inexpensive version. So I use this for blending colored pencils because they're wax-based and they can also be blended with alcohol. And since this is alcohol marker, I just used it to blend. So I just wanted to demonstrate that a little bit for those of you who are interested in doing that technique. So on the sides that were the lighter sides where I didn't add the darker color, I just did some bleeding effect. I'll do it over here just so you can see. So just along the edge where the color is, I'm just gonna run this along a little bit into the color, just enough to loosen up some of that pigment, and then move it around in the surrounding area, and that'll basically it just loosens that pigment up and allows it to bleed out into the paper a little bit. So that's how I got that effect, and I just wanted to share that because I did that post class. So that's how you do that. Thank you everyone for joining me for another episode of Healing Art After Hours. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you find this content helpful. And you can find the notes to this presentation on my website at Creating Space Coastal. The link is below. I also have links for some of the resources that I'm going to share. Hope you enjoy, and take care, and happy creating. Bye.